Hey again, we're going to look at a second part now to rotations, but instead of rotating around the center point, we're going to look at rotating on a grid around the origin. Just a quick vocabulary review from the first video. A fixed point of rotation occurs where that point is sitting is called the center of rotation. Where in the last video, the center of rotation was actually the center of the shape. On this one, the center of rotation will be around the origin. The amount of rotation is actually called the angle of rotation. So we're looking at degrees. And you also have to remember which way you're trying to rotate. Is it clockwise or is it counterclockwise? Now there are some rules and some shortcuts, and you could use either one. I find the shortcut is the easiest way to do all these types of rotations, but there will be a rule on each slide that is guaranteed to work. It's just a little bit more to have to memorize. So let's look at the little shortcut first that you can use on all of these. And you have to go back to what your quadrants are. So remember with the first quadrant, quadrant 1, you have positive values. Quadrant 2 is negative and positive values. Quadrant 3 is the complete opposite of quadrant 1. It's negative. And then in quadrant 4 is the opposite of quadrant 2. It's positive, then negative. If you can remember the values, your positive and negative assignments for each quadrant, it will really help with your rotations. Look at our pre-image, which is sitting here at 3, 2. The shortcut with this is just to take your x and y value and flip-flop. So we're going to take our 3, 2, and we're just going to flip the order. 3 is now going to be my y value, and 2 is going to be my x value. So I have flip-flopped my numbers. But now I have to think about, well, where is it going to be sitting? If I do 90-degree rotation, that's one quadrant spin. So it doesn't tell us, but this one we're going to do counterclockwise. So if I go one spin over, I'm in quadrant 2, which means the first value has to be negative, and the second value will be positive. So you flip-flop, and then change the sign of the first one in this one. If you look at the rule at the bottom, it says a rule for 90-degree rotation about the origin is you're going to take your original XY and you're going to flip-flop and make the first number now the opposite of what it was. So let's look at what happens when you have a 180-degree rotation. You can still do the flip-flop, but instead of only moving one quadrant, you're going to have to move 2. So again, if I start with our pre-image, and I go 1, 2 times, I would have to flip here and here. So if the flip-flop's confusing you, I think a rotation around 180 degrees could be a little bit easier. The only thing you really have to remember on 180 degrees is to flip-flop the signs. Not the numbers, but the signs. So I go from 3, 2. I don't have to crisscross, because if I crisscross, I'm going to have to do it twice. So it really takes your 3 back to the beginning. The thing to remember, though, is I'm going from quadrant 1 to quadrant 3, so both of my numbers have to be the opposite sign. The rule for rotation by 180 degrees is to start with your pre-image. Do not flip-flop X and Y, but change the sign in your final image answer. If I would have the point for 1, to get a 180-degree rotation, I will leave the order the same. So I'm going to go from 4, 1. I'm going to leave it 4, 1. But since I'm going 180 degrees, 1, 2 quadrants, I have to change both signs. If the original point was negative, then the new point, the image point, would now be positive. Now we have a rotation of 270 degrees. Again, remember, a complete rotation is 360 degrees. If I have 4 quadrants, 360 divided by 4 would be 90. So if I'm moving 1, 2, 3 quadrants, that's really 90 times 3, which would give me the 270 degree rotation. I can still flip-flop and then look at my final resting place. If you notice, I only have this little section, it didn't move. If I would do 360 minus 270, I'd be left with only a 90 degree rotation, which may be easier to remember. The same thing that happened with 90 degrees is I flip-flop X and Y and then look at the quadrant you're sitting in. So for 270, again, I'm going to flip-flop, but then if you notice, the value is not changing on the first number in the ordered pair, it's changing on the second. But if you don't want to have to remember the rule, look at the quadrant it's sitting in. For this answer, it's down in the 4th quadrant. So once I flip-flopped, I would have a positive and negative answer. So I start with 3, 2. I want to flip-flop the X and the Y. So 3 is now at the end, 2 is now at the beginning. I know I'm down here in 4, so I know I should have a positive and then a negative answer. And there is the new image location for this point. Now there are 3 examples on your paper, one for a 90 degrees counterclockwise rotation, one for a 90 degrees clockwise, and one for 180 degrees. Try these at this time and then restart your video to see if your answers are correct. Let's check to see how you did on these 3 examples. The first one is a 90 degree counterclockwise rotation. So if I'm going 90 degrees, I just flip-flop, look at where my image would end up, and then determine the positive or negative values. This shape, if I go counterclockwise, will drop to the left. Sorry about that, guys. Drop down here, so now I'm in quadrant 3, which means my answers should all end up negatives. So if I look at my ordered pairs, the first column, if you notice, is now the second column of my answers, the -3, -2, -1. And then when I go for my y values, they are now all the beginning terms, but notice since I'm in 3, this is the one that changes its sign. 0 cannot change to a -0, so hopefully you did put -0 on your paper. If you did, now's the time to go back and erase. But the 3 goes to -3 and the +2 to -2. You can plot these ordered pairs to make sure it looks like it should. So if you go back to your paper, I would have Q at 0, -3. So there's Q prime, -3, -2 for R prime, and then -2, -1 for S prime. And you should see that if I would turn the shape 90 degrees counterclockwise, it would end up in the same location, just in a new quadrant. So let's take a look at 2. Your original T ordered pair is -3, 0. So if you do 90 degrees clockwise, you're going to move it over to this quadrant. But notice only 2 of those will end up in the first quadrant or on an axis. This V is going to drop down here to the 4th. So be very careful with your signs as you do the move here. T starts at -3, 0, and will flip-flop to 0, 3. U starts at -3, 3, This flip-flop is going to look the same as 3, 3. The sign just changes. And then for V, 1, 2 will flip to 2, negative 1 because it's down in the fourth quadrant where the Y value is negative. And then the last example, 180 degrees. Once you have the ordered pairs, you do not flip the X and Y, you just change the signs. So for S, they both started as negative, so they both end up positive. T, the first value, the X, is negative, so it will be positive in the new image where 1 was positive to begin with, so now it's negative 1. And with U, I have a positive 1, negative 3, so it flip-flops in the values to negative 1, positive 3. Again, you could sketch this to look at it. It would be like spinning this picture halfway around to where the U is not sitting in the first quadrant, but sitting now in the second. The S would move through the fourth to the first quadrant, and the T will move from the third to the fourth quadrant. So this one's a little unique in that all of them are in different quadrants, but the good shortcut is don't flip X and Y, just change your signs. So now you have a practice sheet attached to this packet. If you're still struggling, you can try the first 4, raise your hand, and I will come see if you're on the right track. If not, I will try to run some interference and help you along the way. If you feel like you understand it, then you can complete front and back and turn it into the bin. Once you have completed both modules on rotations, you have IXL assigned to you not only for rotations now, but you now have translations, reflections, and rotations to be working on. Remember, you have a quiz tomorrow on all 3 of these. IXL will really help you prepare for your quiz. Good luck. Raise your hand if you need me.